Welcome back to That Track channel. Today we are checking out a 2004 Corvette Z06. We're going to do a full review on this car and I'm going to let you know why I think this might be the best track car for the money. So now, as I mentioned, this is a C5Z. Now what the 5 stands for is that this is the 5th generation of Corvette. So this particular chassis was built from 1997 to 2004, and it came in 3 different configurations. You get a fixed roof coupe like this, which all the Z06s are. You can get a hatchback, or you could get a convertible. Now the benefit of having a fixed roof coupe Z06 is the structural rigidity of the car. So whenever you're tracking a car, you want your car and your chassis to be stiff. With the hatchback car, you would have a removable glass roof, and that targa panel obviously gives up some weaknesses in the chassis. This is the car you want if you want to be on the racetrack. Now along the side profile of the car, the Z06 has something unique to it as well. You're going to find this cut out here behind the driver's rear door, and what this is a brake duct that actually leads to the rear brakes to help keep the rear brakes cool. Really interesting piece of engineering from Chevrolet. So another thing I find really interesting with these Corvettes is they're practically built like a kit car. And what I mean by that is, let's say for example you wanted to change your rear fenders for whatever reason, you nicked one on a racetrack or something like that. They literally have screws here that hold it in place, as well as a couple in the back. You pull out the fender liner and you can literally rip the whole fender right off the car and change it out. The same goes for the front fenders too. Now from factory, this car comes with a staggered wheel setup. It comes with a 17x9 rim up front and an 18x10.5 rim in the back. The rims are also known by the terminology of speed lines, and that was the company that actually manufactured the wheels in Italy. Now, saying that, if you guys are interested in the whole track aspect, the one great part with these Corvettes is they have massive fender areas, and you can jam the most ridiculous tire sizes in the back of this car and the front of this car. My last C5Z was an actual full-blown race car, and I ran a 315 squared setup in all 4 corners. Now, of course, we were talking about this Corvette being an excellent track car, and it is. If you want to go do a couple laps out of the box, you can probably do it. But some items I would be looking to address would be the brakes on this car. So they do come with a 2-piston floating caliper. So at the very least, what you're going to want to do is put high temp fluid in here and track pads. But in the future, it would be on my bucket list if I own this car to go to a fixed caliper setup. Now something else very interesting about a C5 Corvette is it's probably one of the last cars in the world to have pop-up headlights. Check these out. Now under the hood of these Z06s, you're going to find what Chevy refers to as an LS6. So it's a 5.7 liter V8 that produces 405 horsepower. Now a regular Corvette in a C5 iteration would come with an LS1. It's also a 5.7 liter. The Z06 though gets a better camshaft, better heads, and what they refer to as a batwing oil pan. One of the reasons why we keep mentioning this as such a great track car is because of power to weight. Okay, these cars are around 3,150 pounds and make 405 horsepower, which is really good compared to today's modern muscle cars. Now, Chevrolet did everything in their power to lighten these cars. The whole body's made out of fiberglass, and they even went as far to making the whole exhaust system on this car titanium. Now in the trunk area, you actually get fairly decent space in this car. So there's actually kind of like a sunken floor in the middle, and you could easily get a set of golf clubs in here if you needed. Another cool feature is that it actually extends right through to the front of the cabin pretty much, which I thought there would have been a divider being a coupe. But yeah, you can actually slide stuff right up behind the driver's seat. Now, of course, you can have a good track car, but you might not have a good luxury car, and that's the case of this Corvette. While this thing kicks ass on the track, it does not do well on the interior segment. Unfortunately, Chevrolet used very similar items to their more basic entry cars like the Sunfire and Cavalier. Let's go take a look. So on the interior of this car is finished with the torch red package, so it has black and red features on it. And if you look at the switches here, they kind of have this rubbery feel, which might be hard to show, but the switches are kind of unique. But where things really go downhill is when you start to look at like the handle, like it's just this cheap plastic. And same thing with the lock, look at the plastic, the amount of like trim and stuff that they put on this stuff. It's just terrible. So inside the car, you're gonna find a 6-speed manual in these Corvette Z06s. This transmission's called a T56, and it's got a closer gear ratio than a regular Corvette. As well, you're gonna find a traction control button in the center. It's labeled active handling. Now, if you hold the button down for a few seconds, you'll get a competitive driving mode. But in my personal experience, if you become really good on the track with these cars, your favorite preferred setting is gonna be to long hold that button and go traction control off. Now, when you're looking at the interiors of these cars, where the big weaknesses, in my opinion, is the shifter knob, the steering wheel, and this radio display. So for me, once again, if this was my car, the first things I'd be changing in here is going to an aftermarket wheel, something smaller diameter, that's just gonna look a little bit more modern and a little bit better, as well as a better looking shift knob. And I would probably put like a more modern double DIN display unit in here as well, with something that could actually get you some more modern features too, such as Bluetooth audio. And that way you can actually have a little bit nicer creature comforts in your Corvette. Because let's face it, back in 2004, Bluetooth audio wasn't a thing. Now, the glove box in the car sucks for storage. They do give you this center console that gives you a little bit more room. Now, it does open up and kind of has this weird lifting movement to it, but you can at least store a little bit of items in here. It's all obviously focused very much towards the driver. As well, if you're looking for the fuel door in this car, they actually store it in here as well. So you need to push that, and that's an electronic release for your actual fuel popper. Now, one of my favorite features on these Corvettes is the fact that they do have heads-up display. Now, the benefit of that is whenever you are racing on a track, it is incredibly handy to be having all of your features and data being displayed on your windshield, such as your speed. That way, you don't have to be looking down at your speedometer and stuff. And trust me, this is insanely handy whenever you start to really get focused in on the track, so you know your braking speeds and cornering speeds, etc., and it's always displayed digitally on the dash or on the windshield for you. Now, around the actual driver cockpit, you're going to have adjustments you can make for the heads-up display, such as like the brightness of it, as well as like the positioning on it. So whether you're a shorter or taller driver, you can really get it perfectly lined up in your eyesight. Then on the other side of the console stack here, you're going to have certain buttons for fuel, so like your distance to empty, or gauges, which would be like your battery voltage and oil pressure and stuff like that. There's a trip and English metric. You can even switch on the fly from kilometers an hour to miles an hour. Now, since I'm already in the driver's seat, why don't we hit the road with this thing and see what it's like to take for a drive? So driving these cars, they do generate quite a bit of road noise, which obviously can be expected from, once again, a track car. But saying that, they are quite cool to drive. So like, let's say this was your Sunday night or weekend cruiser. When you're actually got the visibility and looking out the front hood, these things are wide, like very, very wide. And honestly, they have quite the cool road presence coming down the road. And of course, like the car handles well, right? Like you get them left to right, and you can tell like this is a handling race car thoroughbred pretty much. And I mean, like, the cool thing too, obviously, is Chevy did a really good job with these cars. So they have a 6-speed, and that 6th gear is like an absolute overdrive. You can be driving on the highway at highway speeds, and you're under like 2,000 RPM, which leads you to get north of like 30 miles per gallon out of a 400 horsepower V8. Now, of course, if you wanted fuel efficiency to go out the window, you just drop a couple gears and put your foot in it. We don't need a speeding ticket, that's for sure. Once again, guys, we're not buying these cars for luxury refinement. We're buying these cars to have an amazing, kick-ass American experience with a big V8 car with lightweight. Now, these cars are really, really good for most aspects. You see guys running these cars in drag race. You see guys turning these things into drift monsters, and you especially see them shine on the road course. Guys buy these cars to run HPDE, they do time trials, they turn them into full-fledged race cars. They even have spec race or a spec series down in the States called Spec Corvette, where it's literally pretty much a whole field of C5s competing against each other. Now, one other thing I wanted to talk about, and this is like one of the changes that I would make in the future, and something that I haven't addressed yet, is this car does have four-wheel independent suspension. Now, I should say it's four-wheel independent. In the rear, it's somewhat semi-independent, and what I mean by that is there's actually a leaf spring that ties the rear corners or the rear end kind of together. And one of the changes that I would make is I would ditch the rear leaf spring and probably go to a coilover conversion. Now, here's where the haters are going to come online, because what I would say is you don't need to spend a whole lot of money to go to a coilover conversion. There's companies like Silvers and Viking that make somewhat affordable coilovers for these cars, and that's where the haters are going to jump in, because they're going to go, oh, no, you need to put Penske's or Ohlins or LG's or something like that in the car. And of course, if you're competing at IMSA level or World Challenge level, sure, go and spend that type of money. But if you're a track day enthusiast or even a serious competitor, you can get away with those Vikings. And I'm gonna actually prove my point to you on that. You guys may or may not know the name Jeremy Swenson. This guy runs Viking coilovers. He had them on a C6Z. He competed and came in #1 at King of the Mountain, which is an autocross competition, as well as I believe he finished first in his class for Grid Life Time Attack. And now he actually does Grid Life Touring Cup in a C5 Corvette. And guess what? It's rocking Viking coilovers, and this year he's placed first every race event so far. Okay, let's try a couple gears here again. Oh yeah, it's moving. As I said, that close ratio box is really, really thrilling to drive with. It's definitely fun rowing gears in this car. Now, something else I should talk about, because it probably looks funny with me sitting over here, is I'm a big dude, as you guys probably have already figured out. I'm 6'5", and like, I do have a little bit of headroom in here. I could probably jam on a helmet. The legs are a little bit tight on the dash, and I have the seat like maxed right out, as low as it'll go, as far back as it'll go. One thing that I did with my race car is I put in a race seat. So I slammed it to the ground to get as much headroom as possible out of the car, as much leg room as possible. So you can buy mounts that you can literally put the seat almost on the floor and push it as far back as possible, and you can really get the leg room that you need out of the car. So I would be fine driving this car as a daily driver in stock configuration the way it is. It would just be, as I said, a preferred setup for me to have a race seat in here. Now let's talk about price point with these cars. These cars are approximately 20 years old, depending on what year you get. And you could be expecting to pay anywhere from, I'm gonna call it $15,000 US up to about $30,000 US dollars. Of course, the 15 grand car maybe has a title issue, maybe it has 150,000 miles on it, maybe the paint's not in the best shape. And then stepping up to that 20 grand though, and up to from 20 to 25,000, you're gonna start to find cars that are low mileage and pristine condition. When you get to that 30 grand range, you can probably expect to find insanely low mileage, as well as almost collector car status. And to me, guys, that's a pretty big bargain to have one of the best cars Chevrolet's ever made. Well guys, to wrap things up, I honestly believe that this Z06 is an absolute bargain. For that 20 to 30,000 US dollar price tag, I honestly don't think you can get much more car than this. So to wrap it up, guys, I would say this car is an absolute win. And that's all we have for today. So if you've enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. But for now, it's time to let this thing rip. Welcome back to That Track channel. Today we are checking out the 2004 Chevrolet Corvette Z06, one of my absolute favorites. and how you can get yourself into one of these cars for a very affordable price tag. No, because you can't get into it for a very affordable price tag. That's a lie. Welcome back to That Track channel. Today we are going to check out the 2004 Corvette Z06. Oh shit, that's not what I want to say. Now, one of the reasons why I believe this is such a great track car comes down to power to weight. Now, I know you're probably looking at me going, you shouldn't be making comments about weight at my size. Okay, like the amount of like trim and stuff that they put on this stuff, it's just terrible.
Really selling this car to me.